Hey, welcome to 12 Tone. Recently I've gotten a couple requests to look into something called Jeths Mode, a scale developed by Dutch composer Willem Jeths. I did some research, but it turns out there's very little information out there. Jeths' work is pretty recent, and so far it doesn't seem like much has been written about it. I couldn't even figure out which of his works it was from, so I have no idea how he used it, but the great thing about being a theorist is that if no one else has already done it, I can just take the thing apart myself and see what I find. So let's start at the beginning. Jeths Mode sounds like this. And it immediately reminds me of two other scales, harmonic minor and melodic minor. These are both attempts to solve one of the biggest problems of natural minor. It has a flat 7th degree. We've talked about why that's a problem before, but the quick version is that our most popular model for how harmony works kind of assumes your scale has a major 7th. Harmonic minor solves that by just slapping one in, but that creates a problem of its own between the 6th and 7th degrees. Even though they're right next to each other in the scale, the interval between them is a minor third. Or, okay, technically it's an augmented second, but the point is it's a big jump, and if you want to write melodies it can get awkward, so we fix that by raising the 6th as well, making melodic minor. Now compare that to Jeths Mode again. They're almost exactly the same. The only difference is this lowered 5th degree, which reintroduces that augmented second from earlier, unsolving the problem that melodic minor was solving in the first place. But that's not the only interval that gets weird. The move from the 5th degree to the 7th is an augmented third, which sounds exactly like a perfect 4th, and going from the 5th up to the 2nd is an augmented 5th, equivalent to a minor 6th. That'll come up again later. But first let's look at the chords. Traditionally we harmonize a scale by using alternating scale degrees, like the 1st, 3rd, and 5th notes, which make the 1 chord, or the 4th, 6th, and 8th, which make the 4 chord. If we do that here, the first thing that stands out to me is that there's just so many diminished triads. We've got 3 built on the root, the 6th, and the 7th degrees. But that's not super surprising. Melodic minor is famous for having 2 diminished triads, and given that this scale is just melodic minor with a flat 5, seeing 3 here makes a lot of sense. What's more interesting to me are the 3 chord and the 5 chord. Let's start with the 3 chord. It's built on the 3rd degree of the scale, in this case G, and it includes the 5th degree B flat and the 7th D sharp. This gives us a chord that I might call a minor augmented triad, but well, that's not really a thing. The problem is we've run into that augmented third from earlier, which means that as far as your ear can tell, this chord includes a perfect 4th. We can show that by switching the D sharp to an E flat, which is another name for the same note, and suddenly we've got something much simpler. E flat major. This kinda blows my mind. We tried to build a G chord and it decided all on its own to be an E flat chord instead. And the same thing happens with the 5 chord. We've got B flat, D sharp, and F sharp, which is again really hard to analyze as some kind of B flat chord, but if we swap these out for E flat and G flat, we wind up with E flat minor, which means the scale actually has 3 different kinds of E flat chords. Depending on which note we try to build it from, we can end up with a major, minor, or diminished triad, all with the same actual root. This all demonstrates an important point. Chords don't have to be built from alternating scale degrees. I mean, let's try the same thing, but start with a D sharp, which is again the 7th degree. If we add the 2nd degree and the 4th degree, we get a diminished triad. If we add the 2nd and the 5th, we get minor, and if we add the 3rd and the 5th, we get major. In every case, the actual distance between the chord tones is always some sort of third, it's just sometimes we're taking more than 2 steps up the scale. But what if we took less than 2 steps? After all, like we said earlier, the augmented second between the 5th and 6th degrees sounds the same as a minor third, so what happens if we treat it like one? Well, that makes our 3 and 5 chords easier. They're both diminished triads. Again, that makes 5 of those, which sounds like a lot, but there's a simple explanation. Most of them are actually just part of one big diminished 7th chord that stretches across the whole scale. Let's step back for a second and look at the whole thing again. We've got a root, a flat 3rd, a flat 5th, and a major 6th, or effectively a double flat 7th, which are all the ingredients for a diminished 7th chord, and if I were a gambler, I'd be willing to bet that this is what Jeths used it for. Diminished scales are a rare but important subset of scales used to create a sense of dissonance and confusion. Probably the most famous diminished scale is, well, the diminished scale. Seriously, that's what we call it. It sounds like this. And if we get rid of this note here, we have this, which is Jeths Mode. Again. So why does that result in so many diminished triads? Well, the diminished 7th chord has a really interesting property. It's symmetrical. It's all minor thirds from bottom to top, and if it's all the same interval, then any triad you pull out of it is gonna have the same quality. If all you've got is minor thirds, all you can make is diminished triads. This creates a really ambiguous sound because no note in the diminished 7th chord has any special claim to being the root. The diminished scale we saw earlier leans into that. It's a repeating pattern of whole steps and half steps, which means it also lacks a clearly identifiable root. But Jeths Mode Mode doesn't do that. By removing one of those notes, it creates structure. It's no longer symmetrical. There's only one augmented second in the entire scale, and you can use that to orientate yourself and find your way back home. Jeths Mode is like a child of melodic minor and the diminished scale. It gets its dissonance from the latter, but its structure is a lot more like the former, and its chords, well, its chords are just really weird. This scale is a relative newcomer, and there's plenty about it that, as far as I know, hasn't been explored yet, so try it out. You may just find something completely new. Anyway, thanks for watching, and thanks to our Patreon patrons for supporting us and making these videos possible. If you want to help out and get some sweet perks like sneak peeks of upcoming episodes, there's a link to our Patreon on screen now. You can also join our mailing list to find out about new episodes, like, share, comment, subscribe, and above all, keep on rockin'.